I just want to welcome everyone to another episode of Behind the Sweet Science, a boxing podcast. I'm joined by producer of the show and one of my best friends, Vinny Casal. How are you, Vin?
Good, brother. How's it going over there?
Good, good. Just had a busy day over here, get some painting done and stuff in the house. So, but yeah, just, here today to talk about another classic fight, classic fight review of Bernard Hopkins versus Antonio Tarver.
The fight which we were at.
Right, another fight we were lucky enough to be at in the famous Boardwalk Hall in Atlantic City. Took place June 10th, 2006. And first we're going to break down, Bernard Hopkins' route, and how he kind of got to that, to that fight. And then we'll break down how Tarver got there. And then obviously, we'll break down the fight. So before the fight with Tarver, Hopkins had two fights with Jermaine Taylor. One in July of 2005 and the other one in December later on in the year, 2005 to close out the year. And I feel like both fights were really, really close and
very similar too.
Right. I was just gonna say they were basically identical fights where Taylor kind of got off early, threw a lot of shots, a lot of volume,
yep.
And then Bernard kind of just came on at the end like he did in so many of his
fights. Yeah, the championship round, God, man.
Right.
That guy's unbelievable from round 9 on. Just something,
right.
Something else.
He was always good with closing the show for sure.
Yep.
But the first fight, I didn't watch it this past week. I did watch it a couple weeks ago, maybe a couple months ago. I watched it, and I felt like Taylor won the fight. I felt like it was a really close fight. I think it could be one of those.
It was more decisive. I agree with that. The first fight was definitely
right.
more decisive for Taylor.
Could be like a 115, 113 type of scoring. And again, it was basically the same fight as the second fight where Taylor basically owned the first portion of the fight. And not because he was really more skilled than Bernard. I think it was more just
Bernard letting the young gun. Yep. Letting
right,
the young gun get his shots off, tire out a little bit.
Right. And Bernard just, he kind of waits to kind of, dissect, his opponents a lot of times. And sometimes he waits too long, And I think both of the fights were, very similar. But did you watch both of the fights? This past
I
weekend?
feel like so I've watched the first one recently. Second one, I know a good amount of. I remember watching it; stayed vivid in my head from when I had to do an extra half a year in high school. So I remember talking about that fight with a lot of people. I remember really feeling like Bernard Hopkins won that fight, and watching it, a couple times in the past, I still feel like he won that fight. I feel like he edged it out, and I feel like a big decision maker was the 12th and final round. But I still feel like Bernard won that fight. He came alive earlier in the second fight. I feel like he came alive around maybe like the 5th, 6th round. Did some decent damage. 40 years old, right? Fighting
right.
Like a 27-year-old or something like that. Under 30, Jermaine Taylor for sure.
Right.
It was a great freaking fight. Round 5, he landed a nice shot. Buzzed Jermaine Taylor a little bit. And came on after that. So I feel like he did a lot better in that second fight than he did the first fight. First fight, I feel like he didn't come alive until like literally the 8th, 9th round.
Right.
Like he almost did nothing. Like I think like less than 10 jabs or something like that I remember seeing during the whole entire first fight. But I think the second fight was a lot better than the first fight. I think how the second fight started sick with Jermaine Taylor, fighting real dirty. He was like, we've been in the ring for 12 rounds already. We shared the freaking the canvas for 36 minutes. I'm coming out dirty. I'm coming out hard. I know what you do. You little hit punches and bro. BH is so good in the pocket and he's so good in that clinch game. Really, nobody better than him when it comes to that. I was floored by watching the Tarver fight with him, and I was like, this guy's really good at that close up clinch fighting.
Right.
The holding and hitting, even though he's not really supposed to do it when he's getting held. But back to the fights. Yeah, that second fight, I thought he showed a really good showing. Aside from Larry Merchant complaining the whole entire fight, but I thought he had a really good showing.
Really, I thought Larry was amazing. Going back and watching the second fight, it just made me, feel like it really is the greatest crew in boxing history.
Yeah, no, it absolutely is, man. That product is such a great product.
The one-liners from Merchant were on point all night, and one of my favorite ones from the second fight was, he was kind of describing Bernard's style, and he said, when Bernard Hopkins was young, he was a lion waiting to stalk his prey.
Yeah.
You know, or a lion rather, a lion stalking his prey.
Yeah,
He's like, now that he's older, he's hiding in the weeds and he's stalking his prey, waiting, right? And that's exactly kind of how he fights, you know, in the second part of his career, you know. But the first fight, again, I remember thinking that Bernard lost close, but he closed really well. The last 4 rounds were really good for Bernard, but again, I don't think it was enough. Now, the second fight, I actually scored the fight. I watched it the other day and I scored it. I actually had it 116-113 for Taylor. I had it 7 rounds to Taylor, 4 rounds for Hopkins, and 1 even, which I hate doing, and I never
You and
ever
my merchant had it around even.
Right, and it's funny because I said to myself after I watched the first round, I said, if there's ever been an even round that I'd ever watched, it was the first round of Hopkins Taylor too, because no one really did anything.
Yeah, it was a feeling out process.
There was a very little punch output from both fighters. Yep. Very little punches being landed by both fighters, and it was just really even. Like I said, Hopkins, I think he knew he had to start a little earlier in that second fight. But you're right. Yeah, Taylor came out. He came out dirty. He was actually the one that got warned for hitting behind the head
multiple times. Yeah,
right.
He hit him like 4 times right in the back of the head, right off the rip.
In the first round, right? He kind of got into the clinch, and he was like, "I'm not having it tonight."
Yeah,
and he smashed him in the back of the head. But yeah, that fight was actually scored. They had some really good judges, some of the best in the game. You know, some familiar names that we know of. Chuck Giampa was one of the judges that night. Patricia Jarman and Dave Moretti, who, I mean, all of them are just icons in the game. And probably, right, basically all, you know, been around and probably scored over, you know, hundreds and hundreds of championship rounds, you know, throughout the years. And ironically, they all had it the same. They all had it 115-113. Which basically, I don't know if my math would be correct, but I think that would be 7-5. I'm guessing for Taylor, you know, which kind of makes sense, you know, because again, it was one of those fights where Hopkins kind of waited, you know, and kind of, you know, just wasn't really trying to do much in the beginning, and then in the you know, back portion of the fight, he started to kick it up a little bit and, you know, started to you know, win some rounds.
Yeah, his goal was to let the young guy get tired, but when you're a young star like Jermaine Taylor, it's going to take a long time to get tired. That kid was in the prime of his life. He was great leading up into that fight, and, you know, pretty great in the first and second fight.
Right.
I had Bernard Hopkins up 1 round going into the 12th. I don't know how. I'm curious to see how the judges had that fight scored the 12th round, because, you know, Jermaine Taylor landed a nice shot at the end of the round, but I feel like Bernard Hopkins was winning that round, and I feel like that one of those two things was a key decisive moment in judging that fight. And I personally, I guess I would have to give that maybe a draw, because I feel like Bernard did enough to win the round, but that one nice shot by Taylor at the end of that round could have definitely changed a lot of opinions. But I think that second fight blew that first fight out of the water. I think it was a lot more competitive. And I feel like it was 2 guys that knew who each other were. They were like, all right, we did this already, and we're going to make this, you know, a better fight.
Yeah, it was a really good fight. And, you know, now we look back at it nearly 21 years later. It was really one of the bigger fights of the year. You know, if you remember 2005, you know, the only fights I could really think of that would kind of match the intensity and the status of that fight would probably be Costa Tszyu and Ricky Hatton. That was in 05, which was a really big fight, you know, for the time. Yeah. And then one of the best fights in the history of boxing, our boy Diego Corrales and Jose Luis Castillo, the first one, was also that year.
Absolute bang. That's going to have to be a classic fight review in the future.
Absolutely. Excellent fight. But yeah, this was a really big fight. You know, I think it was 3 belts on the line. I want to say the WBO, the WBC, the WBA. You know, Taylor had all of them. And you're right, Taylor was he was a star in the game at the time. I think people tend to forget because kind of what happened to his career after. But Jermaine was the top dog, you know, and he derailed Hopkins, which really no one could do. Hopkins was on a absolutely stellar run, you know.
Yeah, I think it was through the middleweight. 10 years undefeated. I think his last fight before he lost to Jermaine Taylor, don't quote me on this, I'm not you, so don't quote me on this, is I believe he lost to Roy Jones Jr. That was his last loss up until Jermaine Taylor. Could be wrong, but I feel like I remember that. I feel like I remember watching Hopkins come up because, you know, Hopkins, guys like me and you and guys that have watched the sport for a long time, they know who Bernard Hopkins is. But him beating Tito Trinidad in that fashion is what really propelled him into stardom, I feel.
Absolutely.
And everybody was just, you know, big on Bernard Hopkins, and you had the young up-and-comer. It was a great fight.
Right. Yeah, we were always a big fan of Bernard. We got to
Yep.
watch him a bunch of times, live. And, every time he was on in the house, in the living room, I like to say,
Yep.
in your house, your father's house, he was always a favorite. I don't think there was any one time that we actually cheered for the opposing
No,
fight. I
never.
think the only time I think I did was when I also went to the Boardwalk Hall and he fought against Kelly Pavlik, because at the time Kelly was probably my favorite
Yeah, I was
fighter.
your guy for a minute. Yep.
Yeah. So it was hard to distinguish who I wanted to win that fight, but Kelly was definitely my guy for a little portion for those early years in the 2000s, and I was pulling for him. But other than that, I was always pulling for Bernard.
Yep.
Didn't matter who we fought, we were always going for Bernard Hopkins.
Yep. For me, it was De La Hoya. That was a very iffy match for me because I loved both of them at that time. But I feel like we were cheering for Bernard. And if I'm not mistaken, that was a Brillo fight that we watched at Brillo's house.
Believe it or not, I actually broke my leg. I think it was that a couple weekends before that. So I was heading up in the house in my living room and watching that fight. But yeah, that's when I really fell in love with the sport because there was really nothing else to do other than Saturday night boxing came on. I couldn't leave the house, so it was really the time when I fell in love with it more than anything.
And for our watchers and our viewers that don't know, 95% of the fights we watched in my father's living room every single time. So there's like a handful, maybe a dozen fights that me and Chris have watched in a different place, and we pretty much know every single one of them that was viewed in a different place. That was like the boxing mecca. That was the digital boxing mecca of our boxing, fandom.
I would say that lasted at least, I want to say about 12 to 14 years, I want to say, where we basically didn't miss a fight together, and maybe there was a handful. And like you said, all the ones we did, we can name them because there wasn't many of them. One of them today we'll actually be talking about later on. Too,
yeah, absolutely. I know exactly what it's going to be too.
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, you said before that was the first loss for Bernard. I believe you're right. I don't have the box rec in front of me. I'm not going to pull it up, but I'm pretty sure that his last loss before that was the Roy Jones fight, and I want to say 1994. So I think you were right with that one.
Damn, bro.
So and he went about a decade, without taking a loss. And again, he was a really, really big underdog in that fight with Tito. Tito was just blowing everybody out of the water.
Yeah, he crushed Joppy so bad.
Right.
Oh my lord.
That was the one night I thought that he had loaded raps because
it was like shotgun blast
right.
every time he landed that left hook.
The sounds that those punches were making, to this day, I've never heard punches like that. Even being live, I've never heard shots like that. So, but yeah, he won a really good run, and for some reason he was kind of always, like kind of dubbed the underdog. It wasn't really many people that were backing him, and just time in and time out, Bernard would just kind of go against the odds and come out on top.
Yep. Yeah, he didn't have much punch power, but his accuracy and his heart, determination, and when he would stalk you, man, there's just not many better people.
Right. And he was a gym rat. He was always in superb conditioning.
Yep.
And he just did a lot of subtleties, a lot of old school stuff that a lot of the fighters today definitely don't do. And even back then, they don't do. He would always kind of outlast his opponents. And like you said before, with the little inside fighting and all that stuff.
So sick, so good.
I definitely, we'll talk about Tarver, Tarver fight, obviously, as we hear about. But it was funny because I watched it the other day, and they were showing a replay of the first round. And the highlight was, Benji Esteves was on the left side. The camera was on the right side. Bernard ripped the right hook to the top of the leg and then ripped an uppercut. And it was like that was what HBO was showing as the highlight of the round. And it just kind of summed up who Bernard was. That was one of his specialties, always kind of hitting on the hip and hitting on the side that the referee wasn't on. And, using his head a lot.
Yep.
Yeah, he was.
His ring IQ is probably unobtainable.
Right.
By today's standards.
Absolutely. I wouldn't say like really a dirty fight. I would say more like he was
blurring the lines, but being Bernard Hopkins,
and gamesmanship. Kind of take a line from baseball. Like it was more gamesmanship than really dirty, in my opinion.
Because it's not like an elbow or an intentional headbutt or a low blow. It's these little things,
guys low,
these little rabbit punches to the top of the thigh, slow you down a little bit.
Right, hitting you on the top of the leg to kind of right, so you can't move that well, and like hitting you on the hips and stuff like that. So. That was definitely one of the things that Hopkins did, right, for sure. But yeah, he won a great run, and honestly, I'll be honest. After the two fights with Taylor, I thought there was going to be a bit of a drop off.
Yeah, me too.
With Hopkins, and I think everyone really thought that because like okay, That's
40.
just reality. He's 40 years old. He had a stellar run for about 10 straight years. He was beating everyone, dominating the middleweight division, and then we kind of thought that would be the end of him. Losing 2 close decisions to Taylor, and no one really knew what they were going to get from Hopkins after that. So, but yeah, after talking about those 2 fights, let's talk about Tarver and how Tarver got to the fight with Hopkins. Tarver was another guy kind of in the shadows of Roy Jones for all those years, even as an amateur, as a kid, both being from Florida, and Roy Jones was a superstar. And I was watching a podcast recently with Tarver on it, and Tarver was saying he was in a drug rehab in 1988 when Roy Jones was winning gold. Or actually, I think they robbed him for the belt, for the medal, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I think he was silver, maybe, Roy.
Right. They robbed him in the '88 Olympics. But anyway, he was watching that, and he was telling all the people that he was with, hey, I'm gonna be winning gold, and they must thought he was a nut job, being in a drug rehab, and then you got this guy who's a drug addict telling everyone that, right, I'm gonna be winning a gold medal, and I could beat Roy Jones, because if I'm not mistaken, before that fight, I think they fought in some version of like a junior Olympic tournament or something like that. Yeah, and Tarver actually beat him. So I think he was saying like, hey, if he can do it, I know I can do it. So that was one of his things. But again, Tarver was one of those guys that, like I said, he was kind of always in the shadows of Roy Jones, and he really never did anything too great until he knocked out Roy Jones. To be honest, he actually lost. I want to say to Eric Harding or someone like that, broke his jaw. I think a couple of fights before that. And he kind of got off to a really late start because he was an amateur for a long time. And I want to say he was on the 92 Olympic team.
Yeah, I remember Lampley saying something during maybe it was Jones Tarver 3, where he said that he stood around a little extra because he wanted to be in the Olympics, and he missed out on the first time, and then the second time he came along. So even though he was a little older, he still had a good amount of experience that his record doesn't show.
Right. Now I'm thinking about it. I think it's actually 96, if I'm not mistaken. That's right.
It could be. You knew better than me.
He was still an amateur. I think 96 was actually the Olympic team that he was on. And I forgot how he placed. I'm not really sure. I know he fought Vasily Jirov.
Oh,
I think he beat him. Yeah, I think he might have won gold. I'm not really sure about that, but he was definitely
Jirov for James Toney, one of my favorite fights.
Absolutely, he was definitely a really good amateur. And I guess when he turned pro, again, there wasn't much backing, and it was kind of one of those guys that he kind of had to do it the hard way, and really just chase Roy Jones, and that was the fight that he wanted, basically from day one. Like to his admission too, he said that he was kind of hunting him down, and they finally got to meet up. I want to say it was 2003, their first fight, and again, that wasn't a fight I watched this past weekend. I did watch it maybe, like I said, a couple weeks ago as well. And I remember just thinking that Roy Jones won the fight on a really, close decision, and it was more or less of just a classic Roy Jones, counterpunching, pop shot, and it was a 12-round decision versus Tarver in their first fight.
Yep. The only thing I really remember at that fight, it was the first time in a long time where Jones didn't look superhuman. Back up on the ropes a lot, and getting stalked down a lot, and just not really finding the flashy stuff that he normally lands from his ankles and all that stupid stuff that he does that nobody else could do. I remember that was the first time I said, okay, I wasn't a huge Jones fan because I didn't like the gamesmanship, but I always respected the hell out of that man. And that was the first I said, okay, this guy could possibly beat him. If they rematch, this guy could possibly get him. Not knowing what happens in a little bit, but, as a youngster, I remember saying, okay, we finally got somebody that might be able to take this guy out to pasture.
Right. Yeah, I was never really a big Roy Jones fan either myself.
But he's so good. But yeah,
he was.
Yeah, he's so freaking good.
Prime Jones was awesome.
Yeah.
It was kind of unfortunate though that we didn't really get to see a lot of good opponents for a young Roy Jones.
Absolutely. My father used to say that all the time.
Other than like James Toney and Bernard Hopkins, it was very little opposition for him, and there was a few fights I thought he could have took, and maybe his promoters or whoever kind of stirred him other ways. Like to me, Mitchell, it was tough to say his name. He was a guy that fought in Germany, Michalski.
I'm definitely not going to be able to get it either.
Yeah, it's one of those Majeski, something like that, but something with an M. And he was like a top dog in Germany, and he was in the same division as Roy. And for whatever reason, the fight never came to fruition. You know, there was a lot of talks about the fight happening, and he didn't want to go to Germany, and the other guy didn't want to come to America. It was one of those things. But yeah, there was limited opposition for him.
Too much risk, little reward, probably.
Right. But he did what he had to do, and he dominated divisions. You know, and then basically he wanted to go up to heavyweight and kind of do the impossible, which, you know, something that didn't really get done a lot in the 90s and that time. It was more of in the 50s and the 60s, that kind of did stuff like that when they would jump up from light heavyweight to heavyweight. And then he went up and won a WBA crown against Johnny 1-2 and hold Ruiz.
The clinch king.
Right, the clinch king. And after that, you know, he wanted the Tarver fight. I always kind of, you know, was mad at him for not staying at heavyweight. And he kind of, you know, mentioned this on a podcast recently too, saying he regretted it in a sense too, because there was so many big fights for him up there at heavyweight, you know.
Yeah. Especially at that time, bro. Come on.
Right. 2003. I think what they wanted, I think what he wanted too, he talked about it, it was a Tyson fight, you know, and, you know, we got to see it 20 years later, you know, when they were 50-something years old during COVID, which I guess was kind of fun for the time, but...
It's better than nothing, but not good at all.
Right. And in 2003, it would have been a lot more action, and it would have been a lot funner. But, yeah, a lot of guys were still active at that time. If you remember, even Lennox Lewis was still active.
Winding down, yep.
All right, Evander Holyfield was still active. You had the Klitschko's up there. You know, my man Corey Sanders had the big win over Vladimir. He had a portion of the heavyweight crown. They could have had a unification bout. And, you know, for some reason, he just decided to go down and fight Tarver, you know, again.
Yeah, who at the time, Tarver was, before that, a heavyweight, correct?
No, I think Tarver went up after. Yeah, I believe that was after. Tarver was kind of staying at light heavyweight, you know, calling him out and basically just, you know, staying on Roy's ass. For whatever reason, you know, Roy just, I guess, felt like it was unfinished business. And he wanted to go back down and, you know, fight in the second fight. That was actually a fight I did watch recently. And, you know, it was basically, it was, like I said, it was a shock. You know, no one thought that would happen. I just remember the first round being like a typical Roy Jones round, you know, and Roy Jones fight.
He looked great in that first round. He really did, bro. He looked really good in that first round. I was surprised.
Right. And then the second round came, and he just caught him with just, you know, a massive... I don't know if it was like it wasn't really a straight left, like one of those really sharp, like,
it was like
sniper left.
Like almost like curved. It was almost like an overhand hook, but like it curved over the top, and it landed while Roy was throwing, I believe, a right hook himself.
All right. It was kind of like an angle punch. You're right. And I think that's why he really got planted. Well, that's why I know he got planted, because...
And he was off his feet when he got hit, too. He was like lunging back while he was throwing his right. He was doing like this check right hook, and he got blasted. Right. But before we continue, I just want to bring up one thing, and we can't gloss over it. The coldest line in boxing history before a fight. Right. Yeah, I got a question. You got any excuses tonight, Roy?
All right.
Bro, I remember everybody in the house graving. You're like, I can't believe it. I can't believe it.
And even Jay Nerdy was like, well, what's another expression like that? So that was definitely...
I remember sitting on the couch. I was like,
you got any excuses tonight, Roy?
And it was also one of those situations where the person receiving the line was so shocked that he couldn't even have a comeback. You know,
that was the first knockout of the night.
Right, that definitely played in his mind a little bit. You know, in the start of that round. But after he knocked him out, you know, Tarver really just became, you know, the star. You know, and
he took the Rocky Balboa movie from Roy Jones off of that knockout. It was supposed to be Roy Jones as Mason the Line Dixon, one of the sickest names ever, and Tarver starched him. And I think he, you know, I think they filmed Rocky Balboa after Tarver Jones 3. But after he starched him, it was supposed to be Roy Jones. You know, that would have been a great part for Roy. He could have talked as much smack as he wanted to, and Tarver basically got the role from that.
Right. Yeah, I didn't know that. I didn't know that he was in line for that role.
I remember hearing that as a kid.
But yeah, the second fight was in 2004, May of 2004, and then the third fight, I want to say, was in 2005, right? And I believe that movie came out in 2006. So
yeah, so they were filming it in 05. So Yeah,
Right.
so they basically said, all right, we can't do it with Roy anymore. Meanwhile, I think it would have still been a great movie with Roy Jones.
Actually, I think they were filming it in early 2006 because this one we're going to talk about obviously Hopkins and Tarver, but that was one of the many excuses that Tarver used
Yeah,
in the fight, and that was in June of in '06. So I believe that the filming was probably sometime earlier in that year.
yeah,
of
it
that
was.
movie.
It
So
was
after the
after
third
both
fight.
fights. Yeah, it was after both
Right.
fights. So
After the third fight with
he took a
with
big
Roy.
loaf of bread off of Roy Jones's table with those fights.
Right. Yeah, I would like to talk a little bit about that third fight between Tarver and Hopkins. I mean Tarver and Roy Jones. I actually watched that this past weekend. Past week.
I got a confession about that. So we both know it was my sister's wedding when that fight aired, right? We talk about that every now
That's
and
the only reason I know your sister's anniversary because it was that night,
So-
October 1st, 2005.
This is a confession right now. I watched this fight recently, and this was the first time I have ever watched that fight. I have never watched that fight.
Wow.
Really? I knew we were doing the show, so I wanted to watch it. And first time I ever watched that fight. And you know what? I wasn't disappointed.
All right. I was going to ask you because back then, in 2005, there was no watching it on your phone or
No, I was on a
Bringing your
website
tablet.
on my phone, refreshing my phone while sitting at the table.
getting like
trying to see who's
the
winning. Yeah, getting round
like
by
the
round updates. Yeah.
Probably like fightnews.com, one of those
Yeah, I
old
forget what it was,
school,
but yep, that was my
alright.
that was
Yeah,
my
that's
night.
cool.
I'm looking, having a good time, and looking down and flicking the phone up, refresh.
probably on your flip phone.
Yeah,
Yeah, the third fight to me, I went back and watched it, and I felt like Roy Jones could have won it. I mean, Roy did some really, really good things early on in the fight, but for some reason he was just clowning way too much. And I think Larry Merchant had mentioned that a part of him looked, and me and the great Emmanuel Stewart as well, kind of was saying like it's almost like he doesn't want to get hit, or he's like afraid to get
he's
hit.
very gun shy. You could tell he was
Right.
very, very gun shy, man, and I guess rightfully so. But very gun
Getting
shy.
knocked out like that, right? You can never really be the same. And
after
for him,
having
it
the
was true.
career that you've had, and then that happens, I could see it. I can understand it.
Right, he was basically untouchable. But yeah, that third fight, I thought it was close. And you've seen some flashes of Roy, man. I remember at one point they were kind of leaning in, and Roy did like a hook up top, hook down low, and like a left uppercut. And in my head, I was like, wow, you just don't see anyone doing things like that. And only Roy Jones could kind of pull off a combination like that. And everything landed, and it
lightning
was
speed.
crystal clear and lightning fast, and
Yeah.
it was just really good. But for whatever reason, he was kind of, like I said, obviously he got knocked out, so there was a reason for it. But he was definitely gun shy that night, and it was almost like he was fighting to not get knocked out.
Proving a point to
opposed-
himself.
Right, opposed to winning. Right, it's like he was happy with, I went to decision. Yeah, he didn't really beat me, and it was one of those, But in Tampa, it was in, I don't really know where Tampa is compared to, the hometown of Roy Jones, which is Pensacola, and Orlando for Tarver. I'm guessing it's somewhere like in the middle. So, but yeah, they kind of sold that place out, and it was a massive fight, for 2005 as well.
Yep.
And Tarver came out on top. I want to say it was around I think it was 11th round.
That 11th round was the best round in the whole entire trilogy.
Right.
Bro,
It
that
was the
11th round
11th round.
was insane.
Right.
Roy Jones landed a great shot. He got cracked, and he was on,
Right.
on a certain type of street
Queer
for-
Street. Right.
for a couple seconds, and came back, and
Right.
actually did a good, had a good showing after that. He stalked Tarver down. He started throwing a lot of punches, started landing a lot of punches. It was pretty good.
Right. It was weird because he hurt him with a short little right hook inside, and it was almost like Roy looked down at his feet and he was, uh-oh, here we go.
Yep.
And then instead of Tarver kind of sitting down his punch trying to throw like a nice 1-2, he threw this massive wild shot, and he actually almost flew out of the ring.
yeah.
And he was hanging over the ropes. It was a very odd situation, which you
If
don't
that
really
didn't
see.
happen, he might have got him, because that
Right.
took away like 4 seconds. It was a good 4
Absolutely.
seconds of recovery after.
And even when he was hanging on the rope, Roy was covering up, and he was, oh wow, he's there. And he threw a little shot on the inside. But Tarver came out on top. Won the decision. Very workmanlike decision that night, and he wasn't really doing anything too special. He was just kind of plotting.
Yeah.
And that was kind of how Tarver fought. One thing I used to like about Tarver though is he reminded me of a pitcher in baseball where he would change his speeds a lot. He would kind of pouring jab, point, then he would throw a pistol type of jab, and he would kind of, throw combinations and work to the body. But he would really just touch. He wouldn't really commit too much to throwing his shots. unless he really knew he had you,
Yeah,
and then he would kind of turn it up a little bit,
Yep. Yeah, he was a great counterpuncher. It's funny because when you watch the Roy, Jones Tarver 1 and 3, Roy Jones is like a very fast, twitchy counterpuncher. Antonio Tarver is a slow, plodding counterpuncher.
Right.
Both counterpunchers, but extremely opposites in their style. And that's why I think those fights were as ugly as they were. Because they're the same but completely different, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, those, and they were kind of the same. The first one and third one were kind of the same, where it was like they were both kind of close. Roy got the first one, Tarver got the third one, but the way they won was kind of similar, where it was just like they were a little busier than the other fighter, to win it. But all right, so after that fight, now again, that was, I want to say, like I said, October 1st, 2005, and then Tarver and Hopkins met up. So that's the fight we're here to talk about.
Yep,
today.
Main event.
Yeah, and that happened on June 10th, 2006, in the Boardwalk Hall, Atlantic City.
In the building.
And right, again, being there live. I think we showed up about 6 o'clock. We were online. I don't even think they opened the doors yet. We were so amped to get to see that fight. And it was weird, too, because it was promoted by, I don't know if you know the guy from Star Boxing, Joe DeGuardia, who's, famous promoter who's been around, especially the New York area. I mean, he's still doing fights. He's a Long Island cat. He does a lot of shows at the Paramount Theater and, various places in Long Island. But for some reason, he got the promotion for this fight, and, it was a really good card, and I went back and looked at the undercard, and obviously I got the poster hanging up in my room, so it's easy to see who was on the undercard. But, it was a really good card. You had the co-feature, which was Israel Vasquez and Ivan Hernandez. Israel's obviously one of those fighters, R.I.P., the guy who was always in some great fights and just a, really, really good talent. And then you had the two sons of legends that fought that night. You had Hector Macho Camacho Jr. going against a Ukrainian fighter named Andrei Tusurkin.
Yep, and we might have had more to do with that outcome than Andrei Tusurkin.
Right, because we were cheering for the dog. Like I said, a lot of times we were a fan of the underdog, and I think me and you were the only fans of him that night. Maybe his dad or someone else did.
Yeah, us and his mother.
Right, it was really quiet when he was pouring it on, and he wound up stopping Camacho, I believe.
Yeah, well, that fight, he had him up against the ropes, if I remember correctly, because I haven't watched that since we were there. Right. And I remember him putting it on him, like you said. And I remember two young idiots screaming, "Stop the fight, stop the fight."
And eventually
sure
they stopped
the fight got stopped.
All right. And then the other one that, the other son of the legend that fought that night was Jorge Paez Jr., who actually got a win against Travis Hartman. So those are two pretty big, right, two pretty big fights, three big fights before the main event. And they also had a heavyweight that night, Kevin Johnson. I don't even remember the name, but at the time he was a rising heavyweight prospect. He actually fought Daniel Bispo, who was another guy that kind of matched up with my man Corey Sanders later in his career.
How'd that work out for him?
Not too good. Sanders got the better. He actually went in distance with Sanders, believe it or not. But yeah, I think that was in 2007. But yeah, Johnson was one of those guys that I think he was about 15-0 at the time, and he was kind of being coddled along, and then eventually he ran to Vitaly Klitschko. Went the distance with him, but lost the fight, and then he kind of became a journeyman after that.
Okay.
But yeah, really, really good undercard, and one of those nights where you want to be in the building from the start because you got to watch a lot of really good fights prior to the main event.
Yep.
So, all right, so we're going to get into the Tarver Hopkins fight. Tarver came into the fight a 3-1 favorite, which again, it wasn't really a shock for people because Tarver was kind of riding, the high horse.
Yep,
because right, he knocked out Roy Jones. He beat Roy Jones, and I don't know. You said you just said Glenn Coffey Johnson. Did they fight before the?
I believe it was after Glenn Johnson knocked out Roy Jones.
Right, so that was September of 2004. Yeah, I think you're right. Right. So maybe that happened sometime in, let's see, maybe it happened in 2006. You're right, maybe early 2006 he beat Glenn Johnson. For a short period of time, Glenn Johnson, after he knocked out Roy Jones, he was just getting some big fights. A
resurgence that nobody expected, no freaking could have ever guessed.
And Glenn Coffey was fighting everybody, man. Yep. I want to say he fought Chad Dawson as well in that time frame, who was a really big up-and-coming light heavyweight prospect as well. You know, he fought Tarver. I think even twice he fought Tarver, I believe.
That I'm
you
not
know,
sure about.
after not knocking out Roy Jones. So yeah, so Tarver was kind of riding on a high horse, and again, B Hop lost the 2 fights to Taylor. So I think people were kind of down on Hopkins. I think that the stock was down on Hopkins at that
and
point.
Hopkins is stepping up in weight too, right? I believe
Right.
he definitely had to step up at least 2 weight classes.
Right. It was at light heavyweight, the 175 limit. But I think, oddly enough, that's kind of where Bernard should have been, I think, late in his
Yeah,
career.
no, he looked great, man. He was fucking phenomenal shape.
And also he worked with Maxie Shillstone, the guy that was known for carving out Evander Holyfield's physique when he went up to the heavyweight division. And
Like Michelangelo.
Right, various other heavyweights that were kind of, light heavyweights that were going up to heavyweight, they're trying to do it the right way with all the clean eating and, the working out the proper way. So he was working with him. And, yeah, Hopkins put out a great product that night as far as how he looked. And, if you look at the two at the weigh-ins, I think they list Bernard at 6'1" and Tarver at 6'2", but I felt like Bernard was the same height as Tarver,
Yeah, he didn't look much smaller at all, man. I did not, as somebody who just naturally looks big like Tarver, he didn't look that much bigger than Bernard.
Right. And then as far as their weights were concerned, believe it or not, Bernard was heavier the night of the fight after he weighed in.
Dehydration?
Right. I think you want to say he was about 182, and I think Tarver was about 178 or 179, something like that.
Okay.
And, yeah, Tarver went down. Obviously, like you said, he was doing the movie in 2006 with Sylvester Stallone, Rocky Balboa, playing Mason the Lion Dixon. I got a classic.
Lion Dixon.
Classic fighter name. Pretty good movie, too. Decent movie.
Yeah, underrated.
But that was one of the excuses. Like I said, Tarver was, I think it was 200 and something pounds for the movie. Not sure why he needed to balloon up to 200 and something pounds to play a boxer as a boxer.
Yeah,
Didn't really get that.
Stallone's not a very big guy
Right.
either.
Stallone's not exactly, Vladimir Klitschko.
Yeah.
He's about 5'7", 5'8", maybe $180, ripped up, so not sure why he needed to do that, but I guess the writers and the director, wanted the physique to be a little bigger. I guess he could be a little more imposing. So he took off 40 pounds, and again, that was one of his many excuses on why he lost.
Yeah, he looked very flat that night. He really did.
All right, going into the fight, Bernard's purse was actually $5 million. I think that was one of the biggest purses he had in his career. And Tarver was making 3.5. So both of them were, paid really well. Also, too, I didn't know this. This is something I found on my research in the last couple of days. They actually made a bet for $250,000, and Tarver lost $250,000 to Bernard that night. So that was another little extra. Right, that was a nice little extra bonus for Bernard as well. And then also, I was impressed with the pay-per-view buys. I looked at it the other day. It was 330,000 pay-per-view buys, in a time where pay-per-view reigned. It wasn't before this streaming nonsense and everything. And it generated $16.5 million in revenue. So I was very impressed by that. And like I said before, that was one of the biggest fights of the year. I'm trying to think, 2006, I was thinking about that the other day. There wasn't too many massive fights. It might have been one of the bigger fights. I know that
Star power wise, yeah, I think it definitely was.
Right, De La Hoya Mayorga was in 06, which was always a big fight. 'Cause anything with De La Hoya in it was massive at that time for sure.
Mayorga is just a maniac. So
so that was always
TV.
Must-see TV, exactly. So that was a big one. And also, if you remember too, that was his comeback fight after being knocked out by Bernard. So. And I want to say Calzaghe and Lacey was in 2006.
That would have been my only guess was Calzaghe Lacey, yeah.
All right. So there really wasn't too many big fights. This might have been the bigger fight of the year that year. And I always tell people when they ask me, I meet some of the crazed fans like myself and, some of the younger kids that, I talk boxing with at work and stuff like that. They always want to know, what's the biggest fight you ever been to and stuff like that. I always bring up Tarver Hopkins. We went to a lot of big ones, but for me, as far as the atmosphere and the way the fight turned out, and as far as just the level of skill with the fighters, and it was just one of the biggest fights I've ever been to, if not the biggest.
I'd have to agree. With a great upset, two great fighters.
Right.
A meteoric rise for one, and one guy that was supposed to basically getting let out the pasture, and most I could say is, the only one that can compare to that while thinking would be Judah versus Cotto, star power wise, but that fight was one-sided.
Right.
And, the favorite won by a landslide. So, yeah, I agree. I agree 100%.
Yeah, looking up at the poster right now, it was actually dubbed the fight to the finish. So it was almost like...
B-Hop was supposed to retire after this fight.
Right. The critics were kind of writing it as this is going to be it for Bernard. And I think he even might have hinted at retirement after the fight, win, lose, or draw. I think somewhere I heard him say that.
Yeah, I remember hearing that. So that's what I remember. He was that was supposed to be his last fight. That didn't happen. But that was supposed to be... But after that performance, how do you retire?
Right.
But, yeah, that was supposed to be it. Yep, fight to the finish.
And he was one of those guys that he didn't really get massive paydays until this fight was obviously the biggest payday of his life. Yeah. And then he kind of just started, ripping off, crazy wins. And he went on, it was almost like it was his second whole career.
He was fighting Roy Jones after,
right.
He avenged his loss.
He got the Roy Jones fight. He got the Chad Dawson fight. He got the Jean Pascal fight.
Yep, that was a great fight, too.
All sorts of fighters, that he was fighting in the Barclays Center. I remember a bunch of times.
Calzaghe.
Yeah, I think he got the Calzaghe fight after too. Right, 2008, right, which was a very close fight, narrow decision loss for Bernard. But let's get into the fight with Tarver and Hopkins.
Go.
Coming out, well, first of all, who did you favor in the fight? Going into what were you thinking was going to happen in this fight?
I was hoping and praying for Bernard Hopkins, but I thought Tarver was gonna get him because as gritty as Bernard is. After those showings where he kind of stifled the Roy Jones Jr., I thought he definitely had the edge of that fight. I didn't expect Bernard to be as big as he was. I didn't expect him to have that much fight in the dog, Right. I was very happy that he was because, we obviously, like we said, are big Bernard guys, and we're there for Bernard. We weren't really there to see Tarver. We were there to see Bernard versus Tarver.
Right.
So, without lying, I thought B-Hop was going to lose the decision. I thought it was going to be kind of a slow fight, kind of like, reminiscent of the Jermaine Taylor fight, because now he's fighting a guy that has just as powerful, if not more powerful, and bigger, just like Jermaine Taylor was.
Right.
So I kind of had that going on, but I couldn't pass up an opportunity to see B-Hop in action.
Right. Yeah, I think the same. I was kind of favoring Tarver going into it, obviously being a big Hopkins fan. I do remember placing a bet that night, too, for, I think, $100. So it was 3-1. So you lay 100, you win 3. So I was definitely... happy about the outcome of that. And again, I placed the bet not thinking Bernard would win. I placed the bet with my heart because Bernard was our guy. And that's usually how we bet, especially back in the day. Always bet with your heart instead of your head. And that's what got you in trouble most of the time, too. But, I kind of favored Tarver in the fight. Obviously he was riding high in that fight, beforehand. He was really one of the biggest stars in boxing, before the fight. And, again, after the two kind of lackluster performances from Bernard in the Taylor fight, how can he not favor Tarver? Like you said, he had to go up in weight, had to gain 15 pounds. So you figured the bigger man was going to win because most of the time the bigger man beats the smaller man.
Absolutely, yep.
So, I was definitely favoring Tarver in that one. But, when the fight kind of started, it kind of was playing out kind of the way I thought it would play out in the first, 3 rounds. I got to watch it the other day, and I don't know what round it was. Before the round, he knocked him down. I want to say it was maybe the 3rd or 4th round.
4th round. Yeah.
Right, I think it was the 4th round where it just didn't. It seemed like Tarver was just not in it. He said something to Buddy McGirt when he went back to the corner. I don't really remember what it was, but he wasn't looking at him. Buddy was like, "Look at me, and he was giving him his advice. And there was something off about Tarver that night.
Yeah, kind of like he actually.
Right, and he made a ridiculous statement, actually. I don't know if you've seen this, but I didn't know it either. But at the time, he actually made a statement that he thought he was drugged going into it. But a lot of these guys, right, they make more excuses than anybody when it comes to losing. It was just like, you got bested that night. That was it. It was your off night, and, the better man won. But then, like I said, the 4th round, Bernard just started painting him with right hands. Bernard was never really a big jabber, really, and he was more of a kind of a pop shot guy and kind of stalk and counterpunch guy, and he was painting him with right hands, the whole night, and then he actually dropped him in the 5th round, I believe it was.
Yeah, I think it was. I was just thinking while you were talking, I'm pretty sure it was the 5th. I might have said the 4th, but I'm pretty sure it was the very end, towards the end of the 5th round.
The 4th is where I started to see a shift kind of changing, because the first 3 was kind of like both kind of plotting, both were kind of doing what they wanted to do, and it was slow.
Feeling each other out. Yep.
Right, and then the 4th round, it was just like Hopkins kind of got the better of him clearly and was landing various right hands. And he was doing a lot of feinting that night. And he kind of comes out with that crab style, and it can really throw you off. And for Tarver, it was a very different style than kind of how Roy fights. Roy's he's pop shotting too, but Roy's more of a finessing guy, and he's looking to do all those lightning
angles.
Right, lightning fast combinations, and he wants to be cute. Where Bernard's looking to just bust you up,
all business, baby. Yeah.
Right, hit you on the body, hit you on the hip, and just kind of. Beat you up on the inside, and that's what he was doing. In the fifth round, like I said, he dropped him. Looking back at the fight now, too, though, I didn't really think it was a knockdown. I know Benji Estevez said the glove hit the ground, but looking at the replay, it didn't really look like the glove hit the ground. So, again, it didn't matter, because either way, he beat him up
and
the whole
Tarver
fight.
didn't contest it really either, so I'm sure if he would have contested it, they might at least would have tried to reverse something or maybe paid a little more attention to it, but he just treated it as a knockdown. He took it as a knockdown, and then it became a knockdown.
All right. And the way it happened, Tarver threw this ridiculous left uppercut that missed by like a mile, and Bernard was like, whoop, bang, and threw a perfect straight right hand.
Punch where he cocks back and falls through it.
And Bernard looked at that like, you're not throwing that on me, man. Come on, this isn't no amateur game, And Bernard just landed a beautiful right hand and dropped him or semi-dropped him. And after that, it was really kind of... that was it for Tarver. Tarver didn't seem like he wanted to be there that night.
Yeah, he took the fight out of the dog with that. I think he kind of discouraged him, and I think he was just happy to get through the rest of the fight also.
Right. And, the rest of the fight basically went where Bernard was kind of just, throwing feints all night and just kind of beating him up on the inside and the outside any way he wanted to. That right hand couldn't miss. And he was doing it good, too, because he wasn't just throwing it one way. I think when you want to land your rear hand, it's great to throw in all different variations. I mean, he was hooking it. He was looping it. He was throwing it straight. I mean, he was throwing it to the body. He was doing everything, man. And he just put on a masterful performance. And, he got the win that night at the Boardwalk Hall.
Yep, he put together a beautiful 10th round where he was all over Tarver. He dazed him, was literally just doing whatever he wanted. That's when, B-Hop, like we said earlier, the championship round boxing god, did his thing and just really stamped out that win and that great performance that I feel like in that 10th round.
Right. I don't know if he was trying to go for the finish or not, but again, Bernard was never really a huge puncher. He was more of an accumulation guy. But yeah, he put on a great performance that night. And Tarver, like I said, he kind of made some ridiculous excuses about it. He said he thought he was drugged and.
I always laugh because I say the greatest fighters could never admit they lose. It always starts with, I'm not going to make any excuses, but... Right. And I'm like, you know what? I love this guy because you can't admit that you lost. That's the makings of a great fighter, in my opinion.
And you know what? When you're a boxer, I feel like you almost have to make excuses when you lose because
you have to. Yeah, absolutely.
In your head, there has to be a reason why you lost.
Yep.
And actually, like I said, there was a podcast recently with Tarver. I don't know if you watched it with Andre Ward. No. It was a really, really good episode. I love Andre, by the way. Andre Ward's podcast is absolutely phenomenal. It's great with the interviews.
Yeah, I can only imagine.
And Tarver made this ridiculous statement, and I didn't understand what he was getting at. But he was basically saying, like, how could Bernard Hopkins outbox me? How can he outbox me with my amateur pedigree
what happened?
And all this and all my accolades and Bernard not really being like this great amateur fighter? And in my head, I'm thinking like, well, you didn't fight him in the amateurs. You fought him in the pros. And I didn't know if Tarver was trying to insinuate that he was on PEDs or something. But he basically, to this day, 20 years later, is still kind of like knocking the win, which to me is very odd and sportsman-wise is a no-no. So I definitely didn't like that. But, I think years later...
You know what? Listen, sometimes you come out that night and
you're
flat. A little flat. You're not feeling it. Maybe you have zero nerves. Maybe you have too many nerves. But seems to me like he came out a little flat and Bernard came out on fire.
Yeah, my boy in the amateur game has a great line about that. He's always like, you can't have an off night in this sport, and it's the truth.
You can't, yeah.
And that's really what happened with Tarver that night. But so yeah, man, if you got anything else to add, I think we put a cap on this episode.
I think we hit every basis. I think we talked about everything we wanted to talk about. We needed to talk about. The great episode. We'll finish it up in post production, and I think we should pick the next fight. What do you think?
Yeah, I was actually thinking about that recently. Because obviously this
we'll
was
we'll give everybody a little bit of a preview of the next episode whenever we finish a classic fight recap.
right. This was the 20-year anniversary in June of this year. It was 20 years, so we can kind of keep the theme of that. You know, if you want to go with any other big fights, maybe in around that time frame in 2006, 2007. I wasn't really thinking like which one. But yeah, I can let you pick it, to be honest, man. And
Well, we talked about Corrales Castillo, right? So let's go with that. We say we got to give our man
right.
Chico. I feel like we can't go 3 episodes in without Diego Corrales.
Right. Really, one of the main reasons I got into the sport of box. I always say that. You know, people ask me. I say Diego Corrales and Vinny Casal. Probably the 2 reasons why I got into the sport of boxing, for sure. And then obviously Arturo Gatti. Once I discovered him, it was just like
he kept
you
you there. Yep, he was the glue.
Seeing that was just, it was a different experience. But yeah, and if anybody has any comments, they want to comment on maybe some future fight reviews, we definitely appreciate that. And if you guys could like and subscribe to the channel, and we'll be posting try about once a week, and we're going to still do some current boxing as well, and some classic fight reviews like this in the future. So yeah, just want to thank you for joining us. And that's it, man. I appreciate it.
Yep. It's been a pleasure, guys. We'll see you next time. Please, like Chris said, like and subscribe. It's 2 passionate people. And don't forget, we have a third guy co-host, Jose. And he's very passionate about the sport also. So, if you want to support us, be greatly appreciated. And until next time, man, we'll see you later.
All right, bro. Later.
Take care.